Hello, Olly here. Just a quick message before we start unwrapping the week, and that is to remind you of our alma mater, The Week magazine. It is the perfect news source during the coronavirus lockdown, delivered to your door each week. It includes all the best news stories, reviews and columns from more than 200 UK and international sources. And to get your first 12 issues for just 12 quid and a free Moleskine notebook, go to theweek.co.uk/offer and enter the promo code POD12. That's theweek.co.uk/offer and the promo code POD and the number 12. And now, on with the show. It's the week ending Saturday, the 25th of April, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the global hunt for PPE continue, a historic price drop for crude oil as demand declines, and the first virtual Prime Minister's Question Time. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me remotely today from the Week's digital team, we have James Ashford from the Week Junior, editor Felicity Capon, and for the first time from his home to ours, it's Money Week's executive editor, John Stepek. And John, I can report, looking at your Zoom background, you satisfyingly have lots of literary tomes behind you, but also equally satisfyingly, I note some miniature alcoholic drinks.
Yeah, whiskey and good literature. You can't beat it.
That is the Stepek guide for surviving the lockdown. Felicity, you're up first this week. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Why the threat to UK press freedom is enough to make you gag.
We work in a dangerous profession where people lose their lives, where people's lives are at risk. Are we a free and democratic society if we don't have a free press? Who is going to hold authorities to account?
Barry McCaffrey there, a journalist from Northern Ireland, giving a stark warning about press freedom here in the UK last year. Felicity, what's been happening this week?
So this week, the Global Annual Press Freedom List was released. This is produced by the campaign group Reporters Without Borders, and it surveys the state of the media in 180 current countries and territories. And it has concluded that the UK has slipped 2 places to number 35 on the list, which isn't very high and falling. And that puts it below countries including Costa Rica, Ghana, and South Africa.
And Jamaica, I noticed, in the top 10.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of surprises, and Jamaica was definitely one of them. But it was very interesting looking at the countries that are doing very well. So Scandinavia occupied all top 4, with the top spot going to Norway. But I think it has really shone a light on press freedom in the UK, and they really highlighted Northern Ireland and the difficulties and dangers of being a journalist in Northern Ireland today as the reason for this fall. And a lot of the focus was on the 2 journalists, Trevor Burney and Barry McCaffrey. They were arrested over alleged theft of a police ombudsman document, which was used in the film No Stone Unturned, which was about a 1994 massacre. They made this documentary. They were arrested and put on bail for a really, really long period of time. And there were some other cases as well. So the killing of Lyra McKee by dissident Republicans in Londonderry last year, which was the first killing of a journalist in the United Kingdom since 2001. And I think quite ironic because, you know, there have been sort of overtures for the UK to condemn press freedom abuses around the world. And actually, this seems to be a case of, well, you know, look at your own backyard first if you want to see what's going on.
Well, I mean, in the case of the 2 journalists we were hearing from in Felicity's clip there, the government are directly implicated in the crimes being assessed by the journalists in that story. James, we have a long history in Britain, don't we, of a free, inquisitive press, but there isn't a constitutional guarantee of it. And some people might say we need more constitutional support for freedom of the press. Is that right?
I think that is right. I mean, you had in that case that Felicity mentioned Northern Ireland's Lord Chief Justice saying that it was inappropriate the way that the police actually obtained the search warrants to raid the homes of those 2 Northern Irish journalists. But whilst it was branded inappropriate, those search warrants weren't actually revoked. So it's coming under this watchdog report, but nothing's actually been done. We are looking at the UK, but we can also look at some other countries too. So you've got the US being branded as having a dangerous anti-press sentiment and saying that there's been arrests, physical assaults and public denigration of journalists. Now, you would expect that in some countries, but to hear all that's going on in the US is quite shocking. And it's shocking to hear that it's happening in the UK too. But perhaps not as shocking when you consider that we have a Prime Minister who is very well known and has been recorded secretly discussing helping a friend have a journalist beaten up in the 90s. So there was this clip where you've got Boris Johnson agreeing to provide the address of a News of the World reporter to his friend who wanted to arrange for that journalist to be beaten up, and Boris Johnson saying, well, how badly is he going to be beaten? And his friend, Darius Guppy, is saying, oh, a couple of cracked ribs, black eyes, that sort of thing. And Johnson goes along with it. He says, I'll do it. I said, I'll do it. Don't worry. Eventually, I think the plot didn't go through, and Guppy said, my only regret is that I was never able to finish the job. But when you've got the Prime Minister of the country conspiring to have a journalist beaten up, it's not surprising that our press freedom ranking isn't doing so well.
In the Reporters Without Borders, they also mentioned the general election campaign last year, where you had the Conservative Party threatening to review the BBC's licence fee and Channel 4's public service broadcasting licence if the party got into power. So that's also quite worrying. I do agree, now that we've moved into this era of coronavirus with James, that I think it takes on an even more pertinent and important place, that we really do have to treat press freedom with the significance that it kind of deserves. I think, some people would say it has even been a matter of life and death, that if you had reporters in Wuhan who were able to sound the alarm quicker than they were given the opportunity to, because the authorities wanted to suppress anything critical of the government or the government's handling it. I mean, that shows in stark relief how important it is. And I think you're also seeing the same thing in Iran. So journalists who are criticising the official figures or the government's handling there, they're being rounded up and imprisoned. And even in the UK, I think this is why the whole story caught my eye, is that I do sometimes think we're the UK is above reproach, and that we are kind of exceptional, and we like to preach to other countries how they should be managing issues like this. But even in the UK, British NHS doctors being gagged over protective equipment shortages, NHS England taking control of communications for many NHS hospitals and staff, and particularly when you had Parliament in recess, and there were questions about whether a virtual Parliament would be reconvened, and you basically didn't really have an opposition asking questions. It's an profoundly important time that we have journalists who are free and able to question the authorities. It really is genuinely a matter of life and death.
And I suppose on the coronavirus issue, John, for people who are listening to this thinking, well, here are three journalists bleating on about their own freedoms, but here they are all able to say whatever they want, and there are other problems in the world. That's what brings it home to everybody, isn't it? Is that actually China number 177 on the list, Iran 173, both countries with huge virus outbreaks. If the truth isn't being reported, if journalists can't even ask questions there that we take for granted here, that actually does have health implications for the whole world.
Well, definitely. No, I mean, press freedom is extremely important. And overall, this list, at the end of the day, there's a clear and obvious difference between the top 50 countries and the bottom 50 countries. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Do I think that we've got a relatively free press? I mean, yes. Could it be better? Yeah, for definite. I think that part of the problem is that thin line between what's the right to privacy and what's the public interest. And at the same time, people with lots of money are more than capable of intimidating magazines and newspapers into not reporting things that are in the public interest because of our kind of libel laws. So I do think that there are a lot of issues in here. There are a lot of kind of fair criticisms to make of journalists and across the board, and we're widely distrusted. I mean, Ipsos Mori carries out a survey every year of all the professions, and journalists consistently rank below estate agents in terms of what the public view is of their trustworthiness. So I mean, I don't know. I think on the one hand we could probably do our jobs better and come in for less criticism, and on the other hand, I also think that the libel laws could definitely do with being looked at.
I think it's also about who owns the press. I think especially right now, again, going back to coronavirus, many media outlets will be facing financial collapse. Like this will be, I mean, it's highly ironic that it's the biggest news story of a lifetime, and yet it's going to kill off some of the industry. Like some publications will really struggle to report on this, and the industry has been in a precarious way for quite a long time. So I think that's the other issue, that they are beholden to money and who's owning it. And I think all that has to be taken into account too. I think I'm particularly worried as well about local journalism. I think, that's really, really important that you have local journalists in specific parts of the UK, and especially, in the courts and seeing what's going on in very local pockets. And I think that's also drying up, which is also really worrying.
And Felicity, what about the current situation, bearing in mind the daily virus press conferences, for example, and the responsibility of journalists who normally might be asking more provocative questions to feel that they need to report the government position? We've seen a situation where journalists who are asking even remotely spiky questions are getting taken down on Twitter by members of the public afterwards for having the balls to have done so.
I think that's absolutely fascinating. Every time I go on Twitter after the daily briefing, I usually see Hugh Pym trending or Laura Kuenssberg trending or Beth Rigby. They are all getting so much vitriol. And I don't know whether it's a sort of phenomenon of the sort of rally round the flag, that in times of crisis, people rush to support the government and the leader sort of no matter what. And it just seems astonishing, really, that, for a lot of them, they are just asking questions as a sort of public information. We want to know what's going to happen next. What's the plan for easing lockdown? Like you say, I don't think the questions have been particularly spiky, and yet they are getting an awful amount of abuse, really.
I mean, it's almost like in this situation, some of the public would rather there was less press freedom.
Yeah,
some of the public would rather that the broadcasters just reported what the government are saying.
I agree. And it's almost, a lot of sympathy for Johnson and Matt Hancock and what they're having to go through right now and put up with. And actually, it is journalists asking all the questions about PPE shortages and when we're going to get these kind of things, which is going to see more rapid progress. So we do need them.
I'm not convinced that's an entirely new thing, though, because we did see there were lots of people criticising Laura Kuenssberg is kind of the most obvious one. From the sort of left Labour side during the election. And before that, I think during kind of the last few years of Jeremy Corbyn's time as leader of the opposition, you definitely had a lot more criticism of journalists from people who were seeing them as holding up the establishment. It's just been an escalation. This crisis has seen an escalation in that existing vitriol towards journalists. And I think that we are slightly replicating what we're seeing in the US, where it's led by the president. So the president is criticising journalists. Here we're seeing ministers more openly criticising journalists. So there was this big Sunday Times scoop the Sunday just gone, where we saw, really, really in-depth, interesting piece criticising the government's handling of the coronavirus crisis. And then the government responded with thousands and thousands of words, pulling out individual lines from this piece and saying, well, that's not true, we did this. And the whole thing is just an attempt to undermine journalists who are attempting to scrutinise what they're doing.
OK, James, you're up next after this. OK, James, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
Whether the push for healthy eating is creating unhealthy expectations.
Welcome to our restaurant with a difference. We are inviting 20 hungry diners to lunch right here.
The tables are set, the kitchen is ready, and the menus are printed.
So far, so ordinary. Yes? No.
Because there's nothing ordinary about this restaurant. Just meters away, we've installed a secret, fully functioning gym.
We have 25 fitness fanatics already warming up, and they are going to burn off every single calorie that is eaten in our restaurant today.
A trailer for BBC Two programme The Restaurant That Burns Calories, in which a crowd of unsuspecting diners feast whilst a second group burn off every single calorie they're consuming in a secret on-site gym. James, an attention-grabbing concept for a TV programme. Why is it your story of the week?
I think it is just that. I think it is an attention-grabbing gimmick, basically, to create a programme talking about healthy eating. But the show has been criticised by the online masses for triggering people who might have eating disorders. And I think that it raises questions about whether it is ethical to show this kind of programme on television. It also makes me think, is the UK particularly unhealthy with its eating compared to other countries? And of course, it raises the question of how severe eating disorders are and why they are rising in the UK. OK,
well, let's answer some of those questions then. Is it ethical to air a programme about calories and exercise I mean, I'd say yes. What's the counter argument?
It definitely is ethical. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, but I think that talking about healthy eating when you've got 2/3 of the people in the UK who are overweight or obese is a really worthwhile thing to do, especially at the moment where we're hearing reports that actually being obese could be one of the biggest factors in the severity of coronavirus symptoms. Just more evidence that it's a really, it's an unhealthy state to be in. The counter-argument would be that talking about calories in, calories out, and focusing on eating and giving people the impression that they have to burn off everything that they're eating is triggering for people with eating disorders. So we saw Beat, which is the UK's eating disorders charity, condemn the programme, and they tweeted afterwards saying that their services were in high demand because the programme had aired, causing the BBC to kind of have to try and defend the programme, saying that it looked at recent studies and was a fair and balanced reflection of what people should be doing with their eating habits.
I mean, a lot of the controversy about this programme, Felicity, was aired on social media before the programme had been. And this is a classic thing where you sort of read the coverage of it and it was as if the BBC was launching a kind of 20-part series where this was going to be the gimmick every week. Whereas actually, it was an episode of Horizon. I mean, it was basically a way of using an attention-grabbing gimmick to talk seriously about some new scientific study which showed that when people know how long it takes them to burn off calories, they eat differently. And I suppose the byproduct of that is, yes, it would have been triggering for people with body dysmorphia, with anorexia. Those are serious conditions, but should that have been a concern in not airing the programme?
I think it should have been, actually. I appreciate that, there was some knee-jerk reaction, but equally that's what the show would have wanted. No such thing as bad publicity. Let's not try and pretend that this is a public health show and that's it. This will be about ratings and viewing figures, and it's a form of entertainment at the end of the day. I think I think for me it's the insensitivity of the timing. Like, I think all the kind of content providers should be really thinking about the coverage and what they're putting on our TV screens right now. I think I know anecdotally that people, under lockdown, their relationship to food has completely changed, and if you do have eating disorders, this will be a really, really worrying time for lots of people. There's things like comfort eating. There's people's mental health is more fragile than ever before. I just don't think this was the right time to air the show. And I think the producers should have been far more sensitive about the timing of when they put it on. I'm also kind of skeptical. I thought the whole kind of counting calories was quite an archaic and outdated form of looking at people's health. I thought we had moved on to a more holistic appraisal, which took in factors like your age, your hormones, your quality of sleep, your gut health, all that sort of thing. The idea of calories in and calories out, I thought that was quite a sort of basic approach to food. And finally, I just think the idea of exercise as a form of punishment, like you can have this burger, but then you've then got to burn it off, again, just seems a bit, on one hand, slightly ridiculous, but on a more worrying side, I think it's quite insidious. I think it's quite worrying for especially, young people and especially women. I think stuff like this disproportionately affects women and young girls and the way they view their bodies and the way they think about dieting.
Well, I'm pleased to say that I don't have to take on Felicity Capon about this because thanks to the glory of Zoom video conferencing, I can see that John Stepek was wincing the whole way through that. So, John, what is your anti-woke response to what Felicity just said?
I love the way I'm just branded as the anti-woke one. It's terrible. I actually see where Felicity's coming from, but I suppose the problem is, it's half an hour of television that you don't have to watch. And obviously with the reaction on Twitter, there was quite a substantial sort of like informal trigger warning before this even came on. So there is that. A minute ago we were talking about press freedom, and now we're talking about how we should be censoring things that might offend a kind of small, proportion of the population. And I suppose my other point would be is that the thing is, at the same time, I have an awful lot of sympathy with either eating issues or body issues, because the problem is that it does stand out in society as being a kind of addiction or a substance problem that is criticised in a way that other addictions or health issues like smoking or gambling are never kind of critiqued. So I can see there's a lot of sensitivity around it. And I suppose it's just trying to find a way of talking about how, 'cause obesity is bad for you. It's bad for you to kind of be overweight. And, it's a major public health issue and we should be tackling it in some way. But we need to find a way of doing that isn't simultaneously shaming people for, struggling with their weight or whatever. So, I mean, I know, I'm actually, this is kind of a wishy-washy point, really. I think that, they should be able to put it out there. I know. But I think the public health message is extremely important, and we need to find a way to kind of tackle this and to give people clear messages about it. Because there is also the whole problem with, the diet stuff. Like, anytime you kind of want to talk to people about the kind of food you should be eating, it's very easy and perfectly reasonable for them to come back and say, yeah, but hold on, for 30 years you were telling us to eat margarine and now we're told that that's killing us and we're still as fat as ever, so we should go back to butter. So I think that the clarity in the messaging would definitely help.
Not at all, because the whole point, I mean, I've watched the show and the show completely focuses on all of that. It explains in detail that, it talks about things like resting metabolic rates and says, we have the GP on the show saying calories provide the energy for our body. Our bodies need energy to do everything, even to think, even to sleep. The whole point of the show is this big public health thing saying you should be eating calories. They explain the kind of calories you get per gram of protein, per gram of carbohydrates. They explain the calories per gram of alcohol. So they're not just saying calories in, calories out. They're also saying, these are the kind of calories that are good for you and these are the ones that aren't. And actually, it is reductive to say calories in, calories out, but you kind of need to be a bit reductive because the fact of the matter is pretty much it's how many calories you eat that determines whether you're going to gain or lose weight or stay the same weight.
I mean, a lot of people just listening to this, putting cake in their ears because they don't want to hear this now. And that was Felicity's other point, wasn't it, about timing. You understand why this show may have been commissioned 18 months ago or whatever, but would you show it right now if you were the controller of BBC Two? Aren't we all seeking solace in fried breakfasts right now?
I would show it right now, and I don't think that there's any harm in showing it right now. And in fact, I think that when we're all locked down, certainly at the start of lockdown, I had a choice. I thought, okay, I can smash a couple of packets of custard creams every day, which is something I can do quite comfortably. Or I can try and, write lots of articles for the week where I try out exercise equipment and make myself slightly happier.
No one is denying that obesity is an issue in the country, but a programme like this is just not the way of managing it.
What was the other issue that you said that this raises, James? You did list a few things.
We know that 75% of people with eating disorders are female, so they're massively disproportionately overrepresented in terms of people who have eating disorders. 10% of people with those eating disorders have anorexia, which is a very, very dangerous eating disorder. You've also got bulimia and binge eating disorder. And anorexia actually has the highest mortality rate of any psychiatric disorder in adolescence, which just shows you how it's young people, especially young women, who are affected the worst by this. And that's partly because of things like social media. So a Guardian study in 2019 found 3.4 million images and posts which were tagged with anorexia or thinspiration in 1 year on social media, which included 2 million on Twitter and over 500,000 on Instagram. So yes, we've got shows like this which are talking about the public health side of things, but it's social media where people are being encouraged to drop weight to completely unhealthy or unrealistic body shapes that we need to be more concerned about. So
yeah, but it's because of the backlash on social media that you're now talking about anorexia. So the backlash, Felicity, actually might be helpful. People getting sort of hot under the collar about this might be helpful to focus attentions on eating disorders.
I don't think so. I mean, I think a lot of people, we were talking about knee-jerk reactions, about people sort of, piling in their 2 cents before they'd even seen it. I think that's because some of them were genuine warnings, like, do not watch this show. Surely nothing good can come out of it. This is not the forum for us to be talking about this.
Also, I think that the conversation already wasn't in the right place, because we see that because of, the body positivity movement, which is a good thing, in some places it's gone too far. And now a study this year, actually, of 2,000 dieters found that 2/3 of young women try and hide their weight loss plans because they don't want to be labelled as anti-feminist. And they feel that the rise of body positivity has actually made them feel guilty about trying to get themselves fitter and more healthy, or, wanting to drop a dress size was the question that was put to them. We saw people like Adele got really, really horribly criticised when pictures of her in January emerged because she'd lost 3 stone in weight. So I think that absolutely people shouldn't judge their worth or their value by their weight or their appearance, of course. But also, we don't have to tell people it's okay to accept the fact that you are unhealthy because of your weight. And if we can encourage people through education to get to a healthy weight, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a double standard, isn't there, John, amongst some people who comment on this stuff on social media? They're angry because a program has made people focus on weight loss and exercise. But at the same time, programs on weight loss and exercise are hugely popular. That's why they get screened. We know that these people download exercise videos. We know that these people go on diets.
Yeah, I mean, there's a monumental double standard. And it's the same double standard. I mean, to be fair, a lot of this boils down to the way that, I suppose there's a wider cultural issue of the way that women are at the sharp end of this. And I mean, my overall view would be that people need to stop telling women what they should be thinking and what they should be doing. And they should, it should be up to Adele if she wants to go on a diet. And it's put this, I think I agree with Felicity's point in that every woman I know has a much more complicated relationship with food and much more kind of awareness of what she's eating than any man I know at all. So I think that's an absolutely valid point. And I actually think that from that point of view, it's probably a little bit more difficult for James and I to kind of perceive the programme from the same standpoint. And I do know that generally whenever I often kind of read the Sunday supplement magazines that my wife's got, and all the kind of fashion mags and have a flick through them. And the thing that comes across more than anything else is, my God, will you stop nagging your readers, with all of this conflicting, that you should be doing this, or you should be ignoring that, or you should be angry about this. Whenever you pick up a mag that's aimed at men, it's kind of like, it's just, yeah, you're doing okay. Even the men's health magazines, they're all like kind of, oh yeah, you should do this, you should do these number of reps, but you can't do it, don't worry, just do your best. So I think there is a wider cultural issue around this. I have no idea how you address that or even start to address it. But I guess that's my kind of wishy-washy way of saying that, yeah, I agree with James that public health is important. At the same time, I can see how there are two totally different audiences here. And I get Felicity's point about it maybe being more sensitive for one of those audiences than for the other.
Well, I don't know. I think some of my relationships with food are amongst the best relationships I've ever had. John, you're up next after this. Okay, John, your turn. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
One of the oldest forms of money still has a role to play in the financial system.
Gold is the ultimate safe asset. It's the only part of the central bank's balance sheet that has that there's nobody else's liability essentially, and everything else that they hold is someone else's liability. Is your mortgage or a piece of somebody else's security, or a piece of a pension fund liability. So or a pension fund asset. So essentially, gold is we still view it as a core part of the monetary base, and that's why we think it will go up in value here.
Francisco Blanche from Bank of America Merrill Lynch telling Bloomberg News about a boom time for the value of gold. John, what's the story?
Yeah, basically, Bank of America has come out and said that it thinks that the price of gold will pretty much double in the next 18 months to $3,000 an ounce. Now, that is the previous record gold price was set in 2011 when gold rose to $1,900 an ounce, or slightly over then. So that's the highest it's ever been. So to say that they could think it's going to go to $3,000 an ounce is a very aggressive target. They're saying that it's going to shoot up much higher than it's ever been before, and it's the sort of thing that, to be honest, you normally only hear in kind of niche kind of corners of the internet, where people think that one day we'll go back to the gold standard and that we've printed so much money that everything's going to go pear-shaped, and gold's going to be the only thing that's left of any value in the world. So it's quite a big deal for a big investment bank to come out and say something like this.
But I presume the motivation behind it's similar to what we were talking about last week with regard to the boom in online collectibles. 20th century collectibles like the lyrics of Hey Jude suddenly being an investment opportunity for people. I suppose it's, that stocks and shares are going to have a massive problem over the next 10 years.
It goes deeper than that. Collectibles are... There's an element of the same thing as in collectibles, because collectibles obviously are unique and they are in limited supply. So if you have a lot more money being pumped into the world via central banks and governments, then it's likely that the value of those kind of unique items will go up. The thing with gold, though, is that gold also has... Well, actually, up until 1971, gold formed a specific part of the global financial system, and that ultimately gold backed dollars. So right up until 1971, you could exchange $35 for an ounce of gold. That then ended because basically America was spending so much money in the Vietnam War that they could no longer afford for people to come along and give them $35 for an ounce of gold. So the dollar detached from that, and since then, gold has effectively not played an official role in the financial system. However, it's still seen as an ultimate store of value. So it's very, very attractive whenever it looks as though, I mean, the reasons for all this obviously is we've gone into this massive economic recession because the economy's been shut down by the coronavirus. As a result of that, governments need money right now to stop us all from, starving, basically. Now, the governments can't borrow that much. Well, they can borrow it, but they're also using the central banks to print some of that money, basically. Now, when that happens, that in the longer run, assuming it carries on happening, is likely to lead to inflation. And that's one reason why people think that gold will be an attractive investment just now.
And James, we heard in the clip that chap that was talking, discussing gold not being part of someone else's liability, that when you invest in other things, those things are controlled by a third-party company. But the suggestion there seemed to be, get a bar of gold, put it in your safe, it belongs to you. As far as I can tell, most people that are investing in gold aren't doing that.
Apparently it's not a very good idea to be buying lumps of gold, is what I was kind of reading up when I was looking at this story. And I think that might be because there's a big markup on gold jewellery, for instance, if you're buying that. And there's also a markup on bars and coins. Then you have to pay for the safety deposit box in a Swiss bank somewhere.
Exactly. You've got to have a pretty safe house and be pretty convinced no one's going to break into your house to actually be storing gold in your house. So then you're just investing in a thing just much the same as any other investment, aren't you?
I think so. I think the idea here is not that we should all start stocking bars of gold under our mattresses, but I think it's that you kind of have to invest in gold, or you should invest in gold if you're lucky enough to be able to invest as part of a much wider portfolio, because it kind of offsets some of the risk you've got from things like if you are just investing in stocks, then if stocks take a downturn, then often gold isn't. And there's not much correlation actually between how stocks are doing and how the gold price is doing. So it's really low. It takes its own course really. So I think that's why it's often suggested that it should be one of a series of investments or one of a portfolio of investments rather than something you invest in on its own, which I think it makes sense to me. And obviously, as soon as I get any money, I will be investing in gold, but also many other things too.
I mean, Felicity, I imagine you are someone who sleeps on a bed of gold as it is.
Naturally. Thank you, Olly.
Does it make a difference to you that it's the Bank of America saying this could be a wise investment rather than, we buy your gold type internet adverts for a change?
Yes, definitely. I think it has that sort of ring of authority to it, doesn't it? I imagine it is very much tied to what happens with coronavirus. So if the outlook for the global economy improves and the spread of coronavirus slows, then presumably investors will revert quickly back to shares in the view that the damage that has been caused would be limited. So I think it remains to be seen what happens. And the other thing about gold, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but it's the idea that it's not completely risk-free. Like, it's always seen as a form of investment insurance, but actually it's really volatile, isn't it? And the price does fluctuate up and down like crazy. And I read somewhere that someone who bought gold at its peak in 1980, when it hit $666 an ounce, would have had to wait until 2007 for it to get back to the level on a nominal basis. So it's not a surefire thing, is it?
No, I mean, sorry, Felicity's absolutely right there. People often describe gold as a safe haven asset, and that is, I mean, I don't like that description because it gives people the wrong idea about what it is. You're absolutely right. I mean, the figure was actually just over $850 an ounce in the 1980s. But you're right, by 2000, gold was trading at about $200 an ounce. So to be very clear, the gold price goes up and down every single day. It's nothing like a bank account. And if you bought it in 1980, then yeah, you would be waiting for ages for it to come back to, to get back to where it was, even in nominal terms. And if you're talking about real terms, which is after inflation, then I'm not sure it has ever kind of like hit that peak again.
And I suppose people are powerless to influence the value of it as well, in a sense. It reacts, doesn't it, to the markets in a way that a company could change direction by getting a new CEO or borrowing some more money. Gold can't do that. It just sits there.
Well, that's the strength of gold. That's basically what it's for. I mean, put it this way, if you were told you've got to bury something under the ground, and in 1,000 years, one of your descendants is going to be able to come and dig it back up. Gold is about the only thing, if you think about all the assets you could possibly buy, gold is about the only thing that would have any chance of still having value in 1,000 years. If you buried kind of like a handful of pound coins, I mean, the odds are sterling will be gone by then. Same with the dollar.
But then it'll be a collectible, John.
It's interesting what you were saying about the price of gold fluctuating so quickly, because obviously the UK has a bit of form in this area, having sold 400 tonnes of it in 1999 via Gordon Brown. Then by the end of 2002, the UK gold reserves had pretty much, over half of it had been wiped out, just as the value of gold was increasing dramatically. So we ended up losing, I think, about 2 billion, 2,000 million from the gold that we sold. So I think you'll be careful with those fluctuating prices.
Yes, that was perfect timing on Gordon Brown's part. And it's widely acknowledged to have been one of the obvious signs that the gold price was about to bottom out. That's what's known as a contrarian indicator. And also, I mean, to be fair, that was all tied up in politics.
Don't start talking about 2008 again. We've been there too many times, John. Let's pick up what Felicity was saying about right now, which is the kind of assumption, I guess, that interest rates are going to be in negative territory for many years to come. So if you have cash or stocks and shares, what's your view? She was saying, well, maybe we'll find out, maybe we'll see in the next few months whether this is a good investment in gold or not. What is your view about the real terms value of those assets over the next 5 years?
I mean, my view is that Bank of America, I basically agree with Bank of America's take. I think the big issue here is that however we come out of this crisis, we're going to have an absolute bucket load of debt that we need to get rid of somehow. Now, there's basically only 3 ways that you can get rid of debt. You can either pay it back, or you can say, I'm not paying it back, and you can scrap it. Or you can do, if you're a government, you can pay it back through inflation, which is basically you print the money. And so the person who you're in debt to is paid back with money that is worth less than you borrowed in the first place. So that's how you get out of it. And it's a way of politically, if you like, it's a way of almost defaulting on your debt without actually defaulting on your debt. So even if everything goes back to normal, like tomorrow, there's still going to be this massive backlog to get rid of. As I say, the easiest way to get rid of that is to encourage inflation to rise higher than interest rates on bank accounts and all the rest of it. And that's why you want to hold gold, because gold tends to do well when inflation is higher than interest rates, because it does tend to hold its value. Whereas, for example, the value of your cash will be eroded. If inflation's 5% and the interest rate on your cash is only 2%, you're losing money every single year. Shares can actually do okay, depending on what companies they are and how able they are to raise their prices in line with inflation. But if you're talking about inflation getting up above 6 or 7%, say, which is feasible, that would be very high, but it's feasible, then most companies tend to struggle at that level. And as far as debt goes, as far as bonds go, well, bonds usually just pay you a fixed income. So they do very badly in inflationary times because the fixed income becomes worth less the higher the inflation goes. So yeah, basically, is it going to be $3,000 in 18 months? I don't know. But is it going to go up over the longer run? I suspect so. A lot.
And is gold bullion going to become part of the mainstream financial market again? You're saying no?
I don't see us going back to an official gold standard, because that has its own problems. The main reason we left the gold standard is because it prevented governments from spending money when they had to. And so obviously they just dumped it. It is, whenever people like the real fans of gold are often slightly, detrimentally described as gold bugs. And sometimes they say, well, the reason to go back to a gold standard is it because it prevents governments from spending too much money. It prevents them from going to war needlessly because that involves a lot of spending. But the problem with that is that's a very idealistic view because, we were on a gold standard. This is why we left the gold standard in the first place. If a monetary system is preventing the people in power from doing what they want to do, then it's the monetary system that goes, not the people in power.
I would just go back again to the coronavirus outbreak. And I just think it's very, very interesting to see how it will disrupt supply and whether it will stoke demand. I think I read that there is a growing global shortage of gold bars. And I was reading, it sounded so fascinating that Europe's largest gold refineries are really struggling to keep up because of the shutdown in the region. So I think that's very, very interesting. But yeah, I think for me, it's about this outbreak and what's going to happen in the next few months will determine so much, I suppose.
Well, with that, I'm going to go off and melt down my candlesticks. And we end another gold standard edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Felicity and John and James, gold stars all round. Why not invest in our back catalogue, folks? It's free. Just subscribe to this podcast by searching for The Week Unwrapped, wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Lauren Armstrong-Carter at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.